Malcolm Hayes was just an ordinary man living his life. Until one fateful night, everything changed. A murder he didn't commit, a corrupt cop determined to destroy him, and a system that was never designed to protect him. Tonight, Malcolm's life will be turned upside down. A night like any other. It was supposed to be a regular evening. Malcolm had just finished his shift at the auto shop and was heading home. The warm summer air buzzed with the sounds of the city, honking cars, distant sirens, laughter from the bars nearby. He adjusted his cap, his mind focused on nothing more than getting home, taking a shower, and knocking out. Then, out of nowhere, screek! A black SUV came speeding around the corner, barely missing him. Malcolm jumped back onto the sidewalk, heart pounding. "Damn, man, what the hell is wrong with you?" he muttered, shaking his head. But the SUV didn't stop. It skidded down the street, took another sharp turn, and vanished. Something about it felt off. But Malcolm had no idea that in just a few moments, that car would change his life forever. Wrong place, wrong time. As Malcolm turned onto his street, he noticed flashing lights up ahead, a crime scene. Cops swarmed the area, yellow tape blocking the alley. Curious, he slowed down. A small crowd had gathered, whispering among themselves. "Somebody got shot," an older man murmured. Malcolm's stomach tightened. A shooting? Here? This was his neighborhood. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but stuff like this didn't happen often. He was about to keep walking when a sharp voice cut through the air. "You hands up!" Malcolm froze. A cop, tall, broad, with a buzz cut and a scowl, was storming toward him, gun drawn. Behind him, another officer barked into his radio. "Suspect located." "We got him." Confused, Malcolm slowly raised his hands. Whoa, what's going on? Before he could process what was happening, rough hands grabbed his arms, yanking them behind his back. Click, click, handcuffs. Malcolm's heart pounded in his chest. This had to be a mistake. "Wait, hold up. What the hell is this?" The cops slammed him against the hood of a squad car. "You're under arrest for murder." Malcolm's blood ran cold. Murder? What the hell were they talking about? Framed for a crime he didn't commit. Chaos erupted around him. Neighbors gasped. Phones recorded. Malcolm struggled against the cuffs. "I didn't kill nobody. I was just walking home." The cop, whose badge read Mullins, smirked. "Yeah? Then why were you running from the scene?" Malcolm's eyes widened. "I wasn't. I didn't even know anything happened." "Yeah, well, you match the description." Mullins shoved him into the back of the squad car. "Black male, late 20s, dark hoodie, that's you, ain't it?" Malcolm's breath came in quick gasps. This couldn't be happening. He hadn't done anything wrong. But none of that mattered now, because in Mullins' eyes he was already guilty. Malcolm thought things couldn't get worse. He was wrong. The system wasn't built for people like him. And Mullins? He was just getting started. Tonight, Malcolm will realize this isn't just a mistake. It's a setup, locked up without a chance to speak. The ride to the station felt like forever. Malcolm sat in the back of the squad car, wrists burning from the tight cuffs. His mind raced. How the hell did this happen? How could he prove he was innocent? The police station was cold, sterile, a place built to break people down. Mullins dragged him inside, tossing him into a chair like a sack of garbage. "Sit tight. Won't be long now." The officer at the desk barely looked up. Malcolm swallowed hard. "I want a lawyer." Mullins laughed. "Yeah, and I want a vacation. Guess we both out of luck tonight." Malcolm clenched his jaw. They couldn't do this. They had to let him make a call, right? But minutes turned into hours, and still, nothing. Every time he asked to make his call, Mullins waved him off. "Relax, you're not going anywhere." And he wasn't, because Malcolm Hayes was already convicted in their minds. The fake evidence. Somewhere in that station, someone was typing up a report. And in that report, Malcolm was the murderer. They claimed there was a witness. That witness, a homeless man who conveniently saw everything, but had no name, no record. They claimed Malcolm's DNA was at the crime scene. The reality? His DNA had been in their system from a minor arrest years ago. It was all too easy to plant. They claimed he had a motive. A robbery gone wrong, they said. Never mind that Malcolm had been at work all night. Never mind that the so-called robbery didn't make sense. None of it mattered. because they had already decided. Malcolm Hayes was going to prison. The confession trap. Interrogation rooms were designed to break people. Malcolm sat in one now, under a flickering light, across from Mullins. A steaming cup of coffee sat untouched on the table. A classic good cop, bad cop move. Mullins leaned in, smirking. Now listen, you cooperate, maybe we can help you out. Malcolm stared at him, eyes cold. I didn't do anything. Mullins sighed, shaking his head. See, that's the problem with guys like you. Always playing the victim. He slid a piece of paper across the table, a confession. Just sign this. Say you were there, but it wasn't your fault. You got scared, panicked. Hell, maybe it was self-defense. Malcolm's stomach twisted. They wanted him to lie, to admit to something he didn't do. Mullins' voice was low, almost friendly. You sign this, maybe you get a lighter sentence. Maybe you don't spend your whole damn life behind bars. Malcolm glared at him. Go to hell. The smirk disappeared. Mullins slammed his fist on the table. You don't get it, do you? This ain't about the truth. This is about what I say happened. Malcolm leaned forward, eyes locked on his. Then you better make damn sure you win. Because Malcolm Hayes wasn't signing a damn thing. And this wasn't over. Malcolm refused to break, but the system wasn't done with him yet. They wanted a conviction, and they would stop at nothing to get it. A courtroom, a corrupt prosecutor, a jury that never stood a chance, and a fight for his life. A public spectacle. The media ate it up. Violent thug murders local business owner. That was the headline plastered across every news channel. They dug up his past, his teenage arrest for loitering, a school fight when he was 15, anything they could twist. Mugshot after mugshot flashed on the screen. Not of Malcolm, he had never been arrested before, but other black men who looked just enough like him. They turned him into a monster before he even stepped into court. And the public? They ate it up. Talk show hosts debated his criminal nature. Social media exploded. Another thug off the streets. This is why we need tougher policing. He should have complied. Nobody knew the truth, and worse, nobody cared. The prosecutor who wanted blood, Editor Jonathan Lasky, a prosecutor with a 98% conviction rate, not because he was good, because he played dirty. And now he had Malcolm in his sights. The opening statement was brutal. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today because a hardworking, innocent man was murdered in cold blood. The defendant, not Malcolm, not Mr. Hayes, just the defendant, was seen fleeing the scene. We have a witness, we have DNA, and we have motive. It was all lies. But in that moment, Malcolm could see the jury shift. They weren't looking at him as a man anymore. They were looking at him as a case number. And he was losing. A defense with its hands tied. His lawyer, Aisha Patel, was gone. Was good, real good. But she was fighting an uphill battle. Every piece of evidence they needed, gone. Traffic camera footage that proved Malcolm wasn't there, deleted due to system maintenance. The so-called witness who saw him refused to testify in court. The fingerprints found on the murder weapon? Inconclusive. Everything was stacked against them. And Lasky knew it too. He smirked every time Aisha objected, knowing the judge would overrule. Because the judge? Let's just say he wasn't exactly unbiased. When all hope was lost, day after day, Malcolm sat there as they tore his life apart. Every word twisted, every fact ignored. And then, Your Honor, the prosecution calls Officer Daniel Mullins to the stand. Malcolm's stomach turned to stone. Mullins took the stand with the confidence of a man who knew he owned the room. Officer Mullins, tell us what happened that night. And Mullins? He spun a masterpiece. I was responding to a call when I saw the defendant running from the crime scene. He looked panicked, like he knew he was caught. When we stopped him, he resisted, got aggressive. He kept saying he didn't do it, but that's what they all say. Malcolm's fists clenched under the table. Lies, all of it. But to the jury, it sounded like gospel. He could feel it slipping away, the walls closing in, and for the first time, Malcolm Hayes wondered if he would ever see freedom again. Malcolm was drowning. The case was rigged. The jury already had their minds made up. Mullins had just delivered a flawless lie under oath. And Lasky, he was sitting back, watching it all unfold exactly how he planned. But then the first crack in the system appeared. Someone made a mistake, and Malcolm was about to find it. A surprise witness, but for who? Just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, Lasky stood up. Your Honor, the prosecution calls a surprise witness. The courtroom murmured. Even Aisha stiffened beside Malcolm. A surprise witness? Malcolm's heart pounded. Who the hell was it? Then a man walked in, a man Malcolm had never seen before. He was disheveled, nervous, a man who looked like he was being pushed onto that stand. Lasky smiled. Please state your name for the court. The man cleared his throat. Andrew Barker. Lasky leaned in, eyes sharp. Mr. Barker, were you in the area the night of the murder? Barker swallowed hard. Yeah. Lasky's grin widened. And did you see the defendant that night? A long pause. Then, oh yes, the courtroom gasped. Malcolm's stomach dropped. Who was this guy? And why was he lying? Lasky pressed further. And what exactly did you see? Barker licked his lips, looked around, shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't a good liar, but the jury didn't know that. I saw him running. Running from what? The store. Lasky turned to the jury, voice dripping with satisfaction. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. An eyewitness places the defendant at the scene. He turned back to Barker. That will be all. Aisha was on her feet instantly. Your Honor, we request a cross-examination. The judge sighed but nodded. Proceed. Aisha approached Barker slowly, and then she smiled. A smile that said, I know something you don't. And Malcolm felt something shift. Hope. The cross-examination that changed everything. Aisha's voice was smooth, controlled. Mr. Barker, you said you saw my client running. He nodded quickly. Yeah. And you was at the scene that night? Another nod. Aisha paused. Then, so tell me, what color was the store's awning? Silence. Barker blinked. What? Aisha folded her arms. The awning, the one above the store's entrance. What color was it? Barker fidgeted. Red? Aisha turned to the jury, her smile growing. Ladies and gentlemen, the store doesn't have an awning. The courtroom erupted. The judge slammed his gavel. Order! Order in the court! But it was too late. The damage was done. Lasky's jaw clenched. Mullins stiffened in his seat. Barker had just exposed himself. He had never been there. And now, the jury knew it. The case starts to unravel. Aisha kept going. Mr. Barker, did someone tell you what to say? His face went pale. No. Aisha took a step closer. Are you sure? Barker swallowed hard, eyes darting to the prosecution table. To Mullins, to Lasky. Aisha leaned in, a voice like steel. Who put you up to this? Barker was shaking now, and Malcolm could see it. The fear, the regret. Then, under his breath, barely above a whisper, they said they'd pay me. A hush fell over the courtroom. Lasky shot up. Objection! Hearsay! But it didn't matter, because Malcolm saw something shift in the jury, doubt. In doubt, that was all they needed. Malcolm wasn't free yet, not even close. But for the first time, Lasky and Mullins looked nervous. They had controlled the game from the beginning. They had rigged the board, stacked the deck, and set Malcolm up for a guaranteed fall. But now, Aisha had just flipped the first domino, and Malcolm was about to push the rest. Mullins gets too confident. Officer Mullins had been quiet since Barker slipped up. Too quiet. But Malcolm saw it, the way his fingers drummed on the table, the way his eyes darted to the judge. He was thinking, calculating. And then he stood up. Your Honor, permission to clarify my previous testimony. Aisha stiffened. Malcolm's heart pounded. Clarify? More like fix his mess. The judge nodded. Proceed. Mullins cleared his throat. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. He turned to the jury, his expression serious. Concern. The prosecution's witness, Mr. Barker, may have been mistaken about the awning, but that doesn't change the facts. He stepped closer. I was there. I saw the defendant. I chased him. I arrested him. His voice dropped and grave. I put my life on the line every day. I don't make mistakes. The courtroom was silent, and for a second, just a second, Malcolm felt the shift again. Mullins was good, too good. The jury was listening. They were believing. And just like that, Lasky smirked. They thought they had pulled it back. They thought they had won. But they forgot one thing. Aisha Patel wasn't just a good lawyer. She was the best. Aisha springs the trap. Aisha didn't react, didn't flinch. Instead, she walked to her desk, flipped open her folder, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Officer Mullins, she said, voice calm, you say you don't make mistakes. Mullins squared his shoulders. That's right, she nodded. Held up the paper. Then please explain this. She walked forward, handed the paper to the judge. The judge scanned it. His face darkened. The prosecution table tensed. The jury leaned forward. Mullins frowned. What is this? Aisha's lips curled. Your disciplinary record. Boom, the courtroom gasped. Mullins stiffened. Lasky shot to his feet. Objection. The judge held up a hand. Overruled. Proceed. Aisha turned back to Mullins, who, tell me, officer, how many complaints of excessive force have been filed against you? Mullins' jaw clenched. That's irrelevant. Aisha stepped closer. Answer the question. Silence. The jury was hanging on every word. Finally, Mullins muttered, 3. Aisha raised an eyebrow. 3? Because according to this file, she flipped a page. It's actually 13. Another gasp. Malcolm felt it. The shift. For the first time, the jury was looking at Mullins the way they had been looking at him, with doubt, with suspicion. And Mullins knew it. He turned to Lasky, his eyes screaming, do something. But for once, Lasky had nothing. And Aisha? She was just getting started. The final nail in the coffin. Aisha let the silence stretch, let the jury absorb what they had just learned. Then, she pulled out one last document. Your Honor, she said, I'd like to submit new evidence. The judge narrowed his eyes. What evidence? She handed it over. The judge read it. His expression hardened. He turned to the prosecution table. Mr. Lasky, were you aware of this? Lasky swallowed. Your Honor, The judge cut him off. Because according to this, he turned to the jury, the police report was altered. Boom, the courtroom exploded. Malcolm barely heard it over the blood rushing in his ears. Altered? As in, fabricated? And now Malcolm was finally winning. The case wasn't just unraveling anymore. It was burning to the ground. Lasky was panicking. Mullins was sweating. And Malcolm, for the first time since his arrest, he saw it. The end. And it was coming fast. Lasky makes a last-ditch attempt. Lasky was desperate. And desperate men did stupid things. He shot up from his seat, adjusting his tie, trying to regain control. Your Honor, he said, voice tight, we can't ignore the fact that the defendant was at the scene. The jury looked at him, unimpressed. Aisha leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, watching him flail. Lasky pressed on. Even if Officer Mullins' record has inconsistencies, that does not change the fact that the defendant was in the area that night. Aisha finally stood. You're right. Lasky blinked. What? Aisha smiled. You're right. Malcolm Hayes was in the area. She walked over to the evidence table, picked up a folder, turned to the jury. But what if I told you he wasn't the only one? Silence. Lasky's expression froze. Aisha pulled out a new piece of paper. And then she dropped the bomb. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about a man named Eric Langston. The real suspect revealed. Lasky went pale. Mullins' hands clenched into fists. And Malcolm, he had no idea who Eric Langston was. But judging by the way Lasky reacted, that name was about to destroy them. Aisha continued. Eric Langston has a long record of petty crimes, including robbery, assault, and, you guessed it, fraud. She paused for effect. Let the words settle in. And on the night of the incident, Langston was only 3 blocks away from the crime scene. Another pause, then, and he matches the description given by the store clerk. The courtroom erupted. The judge slammed his gavel. Order! But it was too late. The jury was buzzing, and Mullins, he looked like he wanted to disappear. Lasky gritted his teeth. That's circumstantial. Aisha grinned. Maybe. She pulled out one last document. But you know what isn't circumstantial? She handed it to the judge, and as he read it, his face darkened. Aisha turned to the jury and dropped the final bomb. Eric Langston's fingerprints were found at the crime scene. Boom. Malcolm felt his breath catch. The courtroom lost it. Mullins' entire body stiffened. Lasky's hands curled into fists. Because that was it. The final nail. The absolute proof that Malcolm had nothing to do with this crime. Mullins loses it and exposes himself. Mullins was panicking. Malcolm could see it. His jaw clenched. His eyes darted. His breathing was uneven. And then he did the dumbest thing possible. He stood up. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "This man is a criminal. He's just playing the system." The jury looked at him unimpressed. Aisha smirked. She turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to recall Officer Mullins to the stand." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Mullins hesitated, then forced himself to walk up. He sat down, looked straight ahead, jaw tight. Aisha took her time, walked up slowly, made sure everyone in the room was watching. And then she asked the question that sealed his fate. "Officer Mullins, did you alter the police report?" Mullins flinched. "No." Aisha's smile didn't fade. "Are you sure?" Mullins didn't answer. Aisha stepped closer, lowered her voice. "Because we have a forensic analyst who says otherwise." The room went dead silent. Mullins stopped breathing. Lasky's face was pure panic. And Malcolm? For the first time since his arrest, he saw it. The fear in Mullins' eyes. Because he had just realized. It was over. Mullins was trapped. And he knew it. Lasky was scrambling, flipping through paperwork like he could find a way out. But there was no way out. Not this time. Malcolm had spent months with his life hanging by a thread. Now it was their turn to feel the noose tighten. Mullins' breaking point. The courtroom was silent. Everyone was waiting for Mullins to answer. Aisha didn't rush him. She just stood there, arms crossed, head slightly tilted, waiting. Mullins' throat bobbed. He stopped, licked his lips. And then he snapped. "Fine, yeah, I altered the damn report." The room erupted. Malcolm's entire body went stiff. He had known, he had always known. But hearing it out loud, hearing Mullins admit it, that hit different. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order! Order!" But Mullins kept going. He pointed a finger at Malcolm. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He looked like the kind of guy who does this crap. So yeah, I made sure it stuck. Boom, that was it. The last domino fell. Mullins had just admitted to a full courtroom that he framed Malcolm, that this had never been about justice, just power and control. And now he had neither. Lasky loses his mind. Lasky was on his feet before the gavel even hit the wood. "Your Honor, I move to strike that from the record." Aisha turned to him, grinning. "Oh no, please, let's keep it in." Lasky's hands were shaking. That was a coerced statement. It doesn't count. The judge didn't even look at him. His face was like stone. "Officer Mullins," he said, voice cold, "you do realize you just confessed to perjury, obstruction of justice, and misconduct under oath." Mullins blinked. Odd. Reality hit him like a truck. I didn't mean..." The judge turned to the bailiffs. "Take him into custody." Boom, the courtroom exploded again. Malcolm felt his knees go weak. He had spent months thinking this day would never come. And now Mullins was being dragged out in cuffs, just like he had done to Malcolm. Poetic. The verdict. The jury deliberated for an hour. Malcolm didn't sit. Couldn't. He paced. He clenched his fists. He tried to breathe. Because even with everything, the fake evidence, the leads, the cover-ups, nothing was guaranteed. But then, the jury walked back in, and Malcolm knew. The foreperson stood. Handed the paper to the judge. The judge unfolded it. "Read it." And then, he looked at Malcolm, and he spoke. "We find the defendant not guilty." Boom! The words crashed over Malcolm like a wave. His legs almost gave out. Aisha clutched his arm, her grin wide. His mother let out a sob of relief. And Malcolm, for the first time in months, he could breathe. Aftermath. Karma doesn't miss. Malcolm walked out of that courtroom a free man. But Mullins? He was facing trial for civil rights violations, falsifying evidence, and wrongful imprisonment. And Lasky? His career was over. His law firm dropped him. He was under investigation for prosecutorial misconduct. Meanwhile, Malcolm had a choice: move on or fight back. He chose both. He filed a lawsuit against the city, against the police department, against everyone who had a hand in his wrongful arrest. And he won. Millions in settlement money, public apologies, and policy changes that made sure this wouldn't happen again. Mullins and Lasky thought they could ruin him, but in the end, they ruined themselves. And Malcolm, he walked away victorious. Mullins had been arrested, but this wasn't over yet. When a man like him falls, he will claw, he will fight, he will grasp at anything to save himself. But fate had turned its back on him. Karma was just getting started. Mullins tries to escape the truth. Inside the interrogation room, Mullins sat alone, his hands cuffed to the metal table. A cold, sterile LED light shone down on his twisted face. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he still tried to keep his composure. The door swung open. Tasha walked in, followed by federal agent Jordan. Mullins smirked. "Oh, what a pleasure to see you, Williams. Bet you're loving this, huh?" Tasha didn't take the bait. She sat down across from him, flipping open the file in front of her. Nathan Mullins, former police lieutenant, responsible for fabricating evidence, abusing victims, abusing power, and most recently, her eyes locked onto his, conspiring to murder Malcolm Hayes. Mullins raised an eyebrow, feigning indifference. "You've got nothing on me." Jordan smirked. "Oh, we've got more than you think." He slid a tablet across the table. Videos played on the screen, hidden camera footage, testimonies from former associates, and the most damning of all, audio recording of his call with the hitman. Mullins' face drained of color. He realized this time there was no getting out of it. The cost of desperation. He took a deep breath, shaking his head. "Listen, I can make a deal." Tasha cocked her head, amused. "A deal?" Mullins swallowed hard. "I have information. People way bigger than me. I can bring them down, but I need protection. I can't go to prison." Jordan let out a dry laugh. "You think you're still in a position to negotiate?" Mullins clenched his fists. "I can make this disappear. I have money, connections. If you let me walk, I can—" Bang! Tasha slammed her hand against the table, making him jump. "You have nothing, Mullins." She leaned in, voice ice cold. "Everyone who once backed you is running for cover. You're nothing but a burned-out pawn." Mullins opened his mouth, but no words came out. He realized she was right. He was completely alone. The sentencing. 2 months later, Nathan Mullins' trial began. The courtroom was packed, journalists, former victims, and those eager to see justice served. Malcolm sat in the front row, eyes locked onto the man who nearly destroyed his life. Mullins looked nothing like the arrogant officer he once was. He was gaunt, sunken-eyed, and hollow. But no one felt sorry for him. The judge picked up the sentencing paper, voice firm and unwavering. "Nathan Mullins, the court finds you guilty of abuse of power, fabricating evidence, witness tampering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Your sentence is—" Time stood still. "Life in prison without parole." Mullins' mouth fell open. He was frozen in place. Life. No parole, no way out. The courtroom erupted in applause. Former victims wept. Not from sorrow, but from relief. Tasha smiled. Malcolm clenched his fists. Justice had been served. Mullins, the man who thought he was untouchable, was now nothing more than a broken figure, dragged away in chains as the crowd jeered. Nathan Mullins had been sentenced to life in prison. Those who once stood by him had fled like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Justice had finally been served, but the story wasn't over, because Malcolm still had a long road ahead. After everything, how will Malcolm Hayes reclaim his life? Back to freedom. But nothing feels the same. A week after the trial, Malcolm walked out of prison. The sky was clear, the sun shining bright, yet a storm of emotions still raged inside him. He had fought for justice, but the years behind bars had left scars, ones that couldn't be erased overnight. Waiting outside the gates was Tasha, arms crossed, a smirk on her face. "Welcome back to the world, Hayes." Malcolm took a deep breath, scanning his surroundings. Everything looked the same, but at the same time, nothing felt the same. "Am I really free?" Tasha nodded. "Completely. And there's a lot of people waiting for you." She gestured toward the road. Malcolm turned, and his heart nearly stopped. Across the street, a crowd stood waiting. His family, his friends, the people who had never stopped believing in him. His mother, tears streaming down her face, smiling the biggest smile he'd ever seen. His little sister, the one who had cried herself to sleep every night worrying about him, waving frantically. And even the mayor, human rights activists, and strangers who had come just to celebrate his freedom. Malcolm's throat tightened. He had never imagined this day would come. The day the world saw him as a survivor, not a criminal. He stepped forward, and before he could say a word, his mother pulled him into the tightest hug. Applause erupted around him. People chanted his name. Malcolm Hayes, the man who survived. Scars that don't fade. That night, they threw a welcome home party. Malcolm sat in the middle of his loved ones, but a strange feeling still lingered inside him. Tasha noticed immediately. She poured him a drink and slid it across the table. "All right, spill it. I know that look." Malcolm chuckled. "Tasha, I lost years in that place. I don't know if I can ever be normal again." She tilted her head, thoughtful for a moment, then said, "You know, I read something once. Freedom isn't something you receive, it's something you take." Malcolm stared at her, waiting. Tasha smirked. "You fought for your freedom, but now you have to decide what you'll do with it." Malcolm sat in silence. She was right. Justice had been served. But this wasn't the end. This was a new beginning. Malcolm makes his decision. 2 months later, Malcolm appeared on national television. He was no longer a man wrongfully imprisoned. He was an activist, a voice for those falsely accused. He founded an organization dedicated to helping the wrongfully convicted. The name of the foundation? The Hayes Foundation, named after himself. He didn't just reclaim his freedom. He made sure no one else would suffer the way he did. A new chapter begins. Malcolm had reclaimed his freedom. He had moved forward, becoming a symbol of justice. But what about those who betrayed him? They thought they could escape judgment, but fate had other plans. Today, karma knocks on their door. Mullins in prison. No way out. Nathan Mullins used to be the most feared man in the prison block. But then, word spread about who he really was. A former cop. A man who framed innocence and destroyed lives. The inmates didn't take kindly to his kind. They tormented him, beat him, stole from him. No one feared him anymore. And then, even the guards turned their backs. No one came when he screamed for help. No one cared when he got his teeth knocked out. No one cared when he lost everything. The same way he had stripped Malcolm of everything. He was now a shadow of himself, trembling in the corner of his cell. His power, his career, gone. Mullins, who once thought he was invincible, was nothing but trash now. No one involved gets away, but it wasn't just Mullins. Every accomplice who enabled him fell too. Officer Mike Thompson, the one who gave false testimony, fired, stripped of all privileges. Now just another unemployed man no one would hire. Prosecutor Laura Green, the one who ignored Malcolm's proof of innocence, exposed, disbarred, permanently banned from practicing law. The chief of police, the one who protected Mullins, resigned, forced into hiding. His reputation shattered beyond repair. Every single one of them paid the price. Justice wasn't just for Malcolm. It came for the system too. Malcolm moves forward. Meanwhile, Malcolm kept going. The Hayes Foundation grew stronger, helping hundreds of innocent people. Every day, he received letters of gratitude from those he had saved. One day, he walked into his office and found a letter that stood out. It was from a man who had served time in the same prison as Mullins. "You don't need to worry about Mullins anymore. He dug his own grave. Karma got to him faster than you think." Malcolm smirked. He didn't need to know what happened to Mullins, because now his life was no longer chained to the past. He was the victor, the final lesson. Malcolm's story wasn't just about revenge. It was about fairness. It was about fighting for the truth. It was a reminder that no one can trample on justice forever. Justice may come late, but it always comes. And when karma arrives, no one escapes.